Welcome to Radio Free XP, the lifestyle podcast for those of you in the XP community. Today, I'm talking with Elisabeth Hendrickson, who was the VP of R&D at Pivotal. And that particular title carries a few things it doesn't usually carry, which is responsibility for product, engineering, and design. Elisabeth, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we had a prep conversation and we talking about management because it was so different at Pivotal than anywhere else I've ever been. And you were my first manager at Pivotal. And, I'll tell the short story is that over 6 months, you talked me off the ledge of being I think they had a book, the a-hole, the no a-holes rule. And so you talked me off that kind of a-hole ledge and really opened my eyes to what work in management and leadership is.
You were so sweet. I do want to correct one thing though. You were never actually an a-hole. You may have had aspirations in that direction, and that's what I remember walking you back from. That hey, I see you trying to do this thing. That's not going to work out the way you're hoping it's going to. Let's talk about alternate approaches.
It changed my career, right? That series of conversations over time, it changed the entire course of my career and everything I think about leadership. So thank you very much for that.
Aw, thank you.
So look, you came fully formed with this kind of point of view when I met you. So how did you come to? How would you describe classic management? How would you describe how you vary? And how did you get there?
Well, classic management is very command and control. Very much, I'm the boss, you do as I say. Mercifully, in my career, I would say I only had about 50% classic managers, and the other 50% had their own style. And I learned the most from those other managers who weren't trying to do command and control. And in terms of how I came about, like all of the stuff that you saw, well, when you and I met, I'd been in the industry for at least a couple of decades. Like, I'm not sure I actually want to count how many decades. And so it was the culmination of every experience that I had, good and bad. The managers I learned what not to do from, the managers that I learned other ways of thinking from, the work that I'd done with Jerry Weinberg is a huge influence on me and my career, and his approach to a very human-centered approach to leadership. So gosh, there's a lot there, and I'm just going to stop talking now because
Yeah. Well, let's hear a couple of really good, like, don't do it this way stories. Like, what's a don't do it this way story?
so it was late 1990 something. I was working for a Silicon Valley startup that was working at web scale. That was the thing in late 1990 something, or web speed, whatever. And I remember walking into the test lab. I had just been brought on to head up the supposed quality engineering department. And the VP of engineering, who I reported to, was in the lab. And he was talking to one of the very senior leader tester type people who now reported to me. So this is now my concern. And he was literally jumping up and down and screaming because he was upset about some prioritization. I mean, the details don't matter, right? Like as soon as you get to jumping up and down and screaming. And it turned out that this was kind of this guy's style, that when he got upset about the way that things were going, he was a little bit of a table pounder. And what was really interesting, I think, is this was a learning moment for me, because I remember not just walking out and saying, okay, I resign, which today, if I reported to somebody who was doing that today, that my resignation, effective immediately, would be on their desk. There is no second chance. There is no discussion about it. If I am at a director level or above and reporting to an executive who is behaving in that way, it is not my job to be their therapist and fix them. They obviously have issues way deeper than I can possibly address. So this is why when I say you were not an a-hole, I never saw you treat anybody with anything less than respect.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I cannot not pull on this thread. So a huge part, well, because the XP community is small and people want to come into it and stuff like that. You know, walk us through what you just said. Hey, if I walk into that situation, it's an immediate exit. It's an immediate exit. There's really a few things that I think anyone could hear, which is, well, where did you come to that? Like, hey, this is just I already decided. How did you come to that pre-declared decision? And what would you say to someone who doesn't have decades in the business? How would they cultivate that, and should they?
I'm not in a position to tell anybody what they should do. I am only in a position to say what, at this stage of my life, I will and will not put up with, and what I do and do not consider to be a fixable situation. So it actually took. I told you I'm not. I am embarrassed today to say that I didn't immediately leave. There was a series of events that occurred over some time, like on the scale of year and a half, give or take, in that company that showed me again and again who this person was. And one of the things that I am most embarrassed about is there was actually someone else who reported up to this person, not directly, a skip level, who didn't, not through me, the different part of the organization, who filed an HR complaint. And then HR went around to go investigate the HR complaint. And at the time, I felt like I was supposed to be loyal to my boss. And this is very classic command and control loyalty. You're supposed to be loyal to your boss, right? And so I basically excused his behavior in these interviews with HR. And in the end, because it is important to know that HR's responsibility is to protect the company. It's not to protect the employee, and that's fine. Like, I say that without rancor. Really good HR people are doing a super important job and can do it while still caring about the employees for the company, but they are employed and paid money to protect the company. And so the HR person ended up getting enough information to suggest that the company wasn't going to end up being liable for some horrible thing or whatever. And so they've done their job now. And so nothing actually came of the complaint. But it was in hindsight, after I'd left the company and I was kind of reflecting on my experiences, and I do have like emotional scars from that. I still occasionally have nightmares from that whole situation, not just the VP, but the entire situation. Oh, by the way, the company's dead now. It's long gone for good reason. Many stories came out of that company. But as I was reflecting on my own experiences and lessons learned and regrets and stuff that I was proud of and so forth, this was one of my biggest regrets. Not that it would have changed the outcome, because let's be honest, it wouldn't have. But the fact that I basically stood by and supported someone who was, frankly, in a work context, being abusive, instead of looking at it through the lens of what is humane.
Yeah,
What
I
do we have to
learned.
do? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I learned that, humane. I learned that humane management. So that it was so impressive. I still say sustainable and humane. That I essentially just learned directly from you. And so, you talked about Weinberg being very humane and human centered. So you go from how many situations were you in that were like that? Whereas essentially executive core is just off the rails. You said 50% classic management. What percentage of them were off the rails?
Oh, this was by far the most egregious, which is why it makes a good story, right? Um,
Yep.
but I have seen people be close to that. And what percent? Too high. I mean, it
Too
doesn't
high.
kind of matter what the percentage is, it's too high, but double digit percentages.
Yeah. And so, what did you find in Weinberg that was, I don't know, it was curative to that?
Well, so here's what's magic about Weinberg. He studied with Virginia Satir, who is a renowned family therapist. And he was he used to tell the story that he was at this point in his career when he came to realize that growing his technical skills was not getting him farther, and he clearly needed something else. He ended up finding Virginia Satir, and she is known for treating the family as a system as opposed to the individual. So Mom and dad bring little Susie to therapy to fix little Susie. And Virginia Satir was the type of therapist who would discover, Susie lives within a system and is acting out, but he's acting out because mom's an alcoholic and dad is perpetually absent and so it's a system, and now we have to figure out how to heal the system. And so Jerry took all of this amazing learning and applied it to organizational behavior within technology organizations. And so a lot of what I learned from Jerry was about Satir's models and approaches to dealing with incredibly difficult human dynamics.
All right. And so when I met you, it was at Pivotal, and it was we were in the early formation phase. Pivotal had just Cloud Foundry had transferred over, right? You're
Now,
laughing about that.
I'm laughing because that is such a nice way to say all of that early formation phase. Keep going. I'm sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no, and look, it was because I came from VMware. For those listening, I came from VMware, and they sat us at Pivotal Labs office in San Francisco and didn't know what to do with us. If we were in a, I was in operations, and so Pivotal didn't know what to do with me for months, like 3 or 4, and so it was just your constant coaching of like, we're figuring it out, and so that was fantastic. Um, but you had a leadership role pretty much right away. You
Yeah,
were brought in by Rob because he knew you knew how to organize. Um, and go ahead.
I do have to explain. I believe that I was brought in by Rob at the very beginning because he knew that part of the organization was a separate independent QA department. And he also knew that by that point in my career, I had you know, basically dismantled more QA departments than built, but that I knew about QA and testing, and that if anybody was going to be able to make this transition from a development team that or group, whatever organization, I mean, because it was at that point it was what 120 people were working on Cloud Foundry or something, give or take.
I think, yeah, worldwide, I think it was probably in that range with 40 plus being in Palo Alto. Um, and so, yeah, there were all the classic QA departments. I can't leave that one alone. Like, it would be great to hear your point of view about why are you dismantling QA? How does all of that fit
So to
in,
be super
you know, in,
clear, it's not because I don't value the people, coming back to humane. It's because when you separate the responsibility for testing in time and space from the people who are actually building the software, it never goes well. It does not go well. The feedback cycles end up way too long. So the reason Rob brought me in wasn't because he actually knew anything about my leadership skills. He didn't at that time. But what he knew was that he had a QA group and he didn't know what to do with it, but he knew that I would probably figure it out.
that makes a lot of sense, and that's really interesting. So, but you pretty quickly moved from a director. I reported to you as a director, I believe, and you
Mhm.
pretty quickly moved to VP in charge of data products at Pivotal. And so, what I quickly was maybe a year, something like that.
No,
What was the track?
it was 2 years before I moved into data. I worked with you on Cloud Foundry for 2 years. I think that at a certain point we weren't working as closely together anymore because your path kind of diverged from mine. So I was hired with the title Director Quality Engineering, a title I said I was never ever going to take again. And sure enough, if nothing else, Cloud Foundry proved to me why it is a terrible idea to have somebody with management responsibility, but who's only allowed to look at this very narrow set of things. That's a whole other discussion that I'm going to skip for now. But we can come back to it if you want to. But then what happened? I became a director of engineering, basically, and we had a team that was the leadership team for Cloud Foundry in engineering. And then essentially Rob needed help again, but in a different part of the organization in the data part. And that's when I did move over to start focusing on data. There's a whole other long story about the series of events that led to my becoming the VP of R&D for that group that I don't think is necessarily material to our conversation. And I'm just going to skip all of that. We don't need to come back to it.
No problem. So the material thing really for me is there was a different leadership expectation at Pivotal. And so, so I got my view that I had. What was your view of the leadership expectation at Pivotal in those early days?
I think in the early days, we were still figuring it out. And in the early days, Rob wasn't the CEO of Pivotal. He ultimately became the CEO of Pivotal, but Paul Moritz was. And from everything that I saw, I don't know Paul Moritz well. I think we've exchanged about 5 sentences altogether. I I still respect him so much. I can't even tell you how much. From everything that I saw, every action that I saw him take, everything was super consistent with being a very thoughtful leader who cared deeply about people. And I think that that's also very consistent with Rob when he became the CEO. That's very consistent with Rob. So in our little tiny part of the world, Rob does have a sense of um, well, I mean, I think he summed it up when he basically said, our set of values is do what works, do the right thing, and be kind. And that kind of sums up Rob's philosophy. And those simple phrases, I mean, they're so simple, it's easy to just gloss right over them. But every single one he meant to the core. And if he ever had a leader in his organization who wasn't doing those things, then he was having conversations with that person.
Yeah, it's such it's almost incomprehensible for someone outside of Pivotal to understand how those values ruled. And so from my position as a staff member and later as, middle leadership in Cloud Foundry R&D, uh, I just couldn't believe it. And here's the kicker I'll put on. Everyone has values. The real thing is, do those values rule in the room? And the other thing about Pivotal, it used those values as an anded set. You couldn't just have kind. Like if you heard that value set and you heard, oh, I just have to be nice, like, nope,
Oh,
will
wait,
not carry the day.
can I interrupt you for just a second?
Fire away. Yeah.
Nice and kind are two different things.
Let's hear it. Break all of them down and how you use them.
Okay, so I remember saying in an almost embarrassed way in the super, super early days, like this would have been right when we first met, I'm not actually nice. I try very hard to be kind. And I got way more confident in saying that phrase as time went on because it's absolutely true. I'm not actually nice. I will be really hardcore if the circumstances warrant it. I have no hesitation whatsoever about telling someone no. I have no hesitation, and you're nodding. You've seen me do this, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
have I am absolutely willing to draw boundaries. I am absolutely willing to hold someone accountable for a thing. I have no problem being strong. However, the thing that I've learned over the course, I was such a jerk when I was younger, but I've you asked about my history. Holy snacks, was I a jerk? But I learned, right, that first of all, that phrase, everyone's fighting a hard battle, so true. Everyone has their own stuff. And whether it's personal or professional or their own brain weasels that are yelling at them inside their head, whatever it is, everybody's got their own thing going on. And adding to it does in a negative way doesn't actually help at all.
No. And actually, one of the reasons I want to talk to you about management is because I really noticed in the classic management model, if you observe someone with one of those struggles, the classic management model is like, we'll figure out how to manipulate them with that. They're insecure, right? Play on that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And right, for those of you not watching, it's an enraging idea, but that's actually my experience. And so the kind part was like, look, if someone is struggling, like set up a structure for them to structure that struggle and to grow through it at work. And literally, that I just saw you do that over and over. I saw you create systems to do that. That's how I would describe it. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. And so, well, before we get too far off of it, like right kind works. How do you define each one of those things? And then how do you use them in the room?
Okay, so let's finish with kind. So that, I mean, so much goes into being kind, but ultimately it boils down to I care about you as a person. I care about your health and well-being, and I am going to strive to treat every single person who I work with dignity and respect. I don't have to like them. I don't. I just don't. But if I don't like them, it is my responsibility to check my behavior and make sure that that is not leaking out in ways that create harm. So I'll just leave kind with that because there's so much more that could be said, but we'll just leave it with that. And then um, do what works and do what's right. Do the right thing. Right? Those you might say, well, maybe that's just one thing. Well, so here's the thing: there's what works in the short term. And so if we only had one of those, I love how you said this is an anded set. If we only do what works for now, that expedient solution is going to come around and bite us later. So doing the right thing, that is a set of stuff that do what works is about being pragmatic, being aware of the context, taking decisions that are contextually appropriate. Hypothetically, let's say that we've got an incident in production, something you're well familiar with. Do what works. Do whatever you have to do to get customers back online. But then we're going to do the right thing and make sure that we haven't just patched it in prod and then are going to ship broken code over and over and over again. That's an engineering example. But doing the right thing is also an ethical call to action. We don't overbill customers. If it's kind of like, well, it could go this way or that way, we're going to do the thing that is morally right and trust that it's going to work out in the wash without trying to turn it transactional. And so doing the right thing is really that guiding principle, that North Star that ensures that we never devolve into accepting a level of quality, a level of behavior, a level of that is off the true north of moral decisions. I think we
Uh,
covered all three. So
yep.
just to sum up, because I can be long-winded, being kind is treating people with dignity and respect. Doing what works is doing the thing that is contextually appropriate and pragmatic. And do the right thing is making sure that in doing everything else, we are not straying from the path of I'm going to call it morally correct decisions, but they may not all feel moral in the moment because there are engineering decisions and product decisions as well as ethical dilemmas about do we or do we not bill a customer for this thing.
Yeah. Uh, I came to Pivotal with 20 years of experience, and the most amazing thing about that I just don't think you can hear even in that description is how Pivotal overall left your judgment intact. Like
Mm-hmm.
a whole critical part of it was you have judgment. You are not here to not use your judgment. You are here specifically because of your judgment and your ability to solve problems. That was in the water, and no one ever really said it, but it was so powerful. How do you look at that, and how do you think about that, and how would someone create it at their own shop?
Well, that's a lot of questions.
Sorry, how do you look at it?
So let's let's start with absolutely. Part of um, the difference between a traditional command and control, a traditional command and control manager thinks they're the smartest person in the room and that they're the one who is making sure the organization is doing exactly the right thing. And so that's how you end up with micromanagers and people who frankly have been robbed of their ability to make decisions about the right path. But there's this important balance there. So I'm so glad to hear you say that you didn't ever feel like your judgment was removed from you. And
Yeah,
for the
that was
most part, helping people, giving them enough information that they can make a good decision, that's the preferred mode of operation.
Yeah, I found the empowered team model that comes straight out of XP. I found that model just unbelievable. On every team I was on, I felt like we operated like a team, and it was truly incredible, right? I know we have talked about it personally. I'm like, there's 2,000 working hours a year, and I spent 2,000 of them happy, right? Like I just right because you
Yay!
could just not that there were no problems, but just because like how I've distilled it at this point is you either know what you're doing, you need to learn what you're doing, or you have a dilemma and you are probably going to abandon dilemmas, right? Maybe you're going to learn what you need to learn to solve that dilemma if you have to. But I just found staying in that very tight loop of real solutions. It's tech, so there's a real solution or there's a real dilemma at the bottom of everything. And so, yeah, I just found that truly amazing. You know,
So you said a really important word that I think it's really important to highlight, and that was a phrase, empowered team. So a team is two or more people who have a shared goal or mission, a set of working agreements for how they're going to accomplish that shared goal or mission, and a shared sense of success or failure. So there is no, well, I did my part, now I'm waiting on you. So the reason that the model worked was because we viewed the team as the agent of work. So let's just take a simple example. XP, say you're pairing. You have to convince one other human that the thing you want to do in the code base is a good idea. And so one of the things that helped keep us aligned was that it wasn't about individuals all running off. It was the wisdom of the group. The group together made decisions, and that group was smarter than any individual leader within the organization who would not have access to the same level of information or experience as an entire group of people.
yeah, that the other thing that's very hard to see from the outside is that Pivotal was a fully functioned matrix organization at like in a textbook. And it was completely crazy to see because you've been in organizations where they say matrix, it just means you have five bosses, right? Right, yeah. And right, all right. And that's a terrible experience. But here it was like that was the craziest thing about Pivotal was how much sanity directly out of books was just on display. It's like, well, academic people think a loosely coupled distributed system probably will look like this. Oh, there's Cloud Foundry. Oh my gosh, it looks exactly like that. Like, oh, if you combine Eric Ries Lean and you combine, Beck XP, you get this. Oh my gosh, here it is. It's right out. You can open the book and like, oh, we're doing page 33 right now. It was completely crazy to me that level. But okay, so I don't want to because one of the key things also that we would hammer because we worked with many clients and one of our key things we would say to clients as we delivered was team agreements. We would teach them this, but it was such a weird. They had no concept of it. So I would love.
Well, the first question I ask my clients when they tell me they're having problems is do you have retrospectives? Because that's the best place to establish these team working agreements. They are not handed down to you by the boss. Your manager's responsibility or the leader's responsibility is to set the goals and the constraints within which we operate because not everything is okay and there are decisions that a team does not get to take and have that solid foundation of a culture that values people. But the manager's job isn't to set up the team working agreements. Then they wouldn't be team working agreements. They would just be rules.
Right,
By the way, guess how a lot of smart people feel about rules?
right, not great.
Yeah, some people like them because they say exactly what you can and can't do. But a lot of people are going to rebel against the rules because they're rules that were imposed on the outside, from the outside on them. So a team working agreement, first of all, it comes from the team for the team. And it comes out of a conversation that usually could go something like, hey, I'm I'm sad that it feels like I spend just as a very simple example. I feel like I spend the first half an hour of my day after I get here waiting for other people to show up so that we can have stand up. Can we all agree that stand up is going to be at 9:15? And here I'm using I statements to say how I feel about a thing, and the group might disagree. They might be fine because there is some reason why they're fine, and I may discover that I'm the only one with this problem, in which case it's a me problem. But and for you can use this for literally anything. Could be that we've had too many failures and too many incidents in production or failures in the CI pipeline. Could be that our architecture is evolving in ways that are make me uncomfortable. But whatever it is, the coming up with team working agreements is about having that conversation, and having stating it as a problem. Here's the problem I want to solve. A problem is, this is another Jerry Weinbergism, a problem is a delta between reality as desired and reality as perceived. So here's
Yeah.
that delta. Do we all agree that do we all see the same problem? Do we all agree that that's actually a problem? Do we want to reframe the problem now that we have established that a problem shaped like this exists? Now let's talk about what we want to do about it. What's within our control? Are there agreements that we can make between ourselves that are going to make that problem better? So the working
All right.
agreements could encompass anything at all that is something that the team has felt like they need to agree on, and then hold each other accountable for. Hey, I thought we said that we were going to do stand up at 9:15. Hey, I thought we said that we were going to run the local test suite before check-in. Whatever the thing is, right? Hold each
Yep.
other accountable to it. That's what a team working agreement looks like, and it's from the team for the team.
Yeah. All right. Let me read out my commentary. So you are describing a well-functioning team, right? You're
Yes.
describing and the point I think you're making is that, hey, the team is evolving all the time for good reasons because the world is evolving all the time. So no problem. That makes a lot of sense. I always look at how do you start? Because if you go to it, like we would go to clients and we would say, oh, you need team agreements. And they would all look at each other as if that was like some kind of correct. Like just like they don't even
Is
know
that
where to
in the
start.
employee manual? Where's the team agreement section?
Right, right, yeah. And so here is I had to think about this. And so if you rappel all the way back down, you're forming a team, it's the
Yeah,
first week. What do you put on the table as you introduce the concepts of a team agreement?
I actually don't usually start there. I've
Ah,
had to rappel down. I mean, you saw this on Cloud Foundry, and that was not the only time at Pivotal or in my career when I have sort of landed in the middle of chaos, had to orient myself, and then figure out, all right, what would better look like, and how can I sort of navigate us to better, while still preserving everyone's autonomy in this process, so it's not just me dictating what better would look like.
yeah, you are doing something slightly magical, which is you are engaging judgment at the bottom level because and back to what you said is like, hey, I am noticing. And so you just go right to a person, hey, I am noticing. And as far as I can tell, what you're really
Oh, and
doing
you
is
heard
linking
me
up.
do that over and over again.
Oh yeah, right. And it's the total. It is a classic pivotal model because there's only three kinds of problems. We know what we're doing. We need to learn what we're doing, or we have a dilemma. And so you can put anything on the table. Like I don't like ice cream. Like okay, duly noted. Do you need any more processing on ice cream? Like no, I just needed to put it out. Okay, great. But hey, we're making architectural decisions that look we're sailing into a red ocean here, and no one wants that, right? And
Yeah.
so, project that you performed really to me was engaging with judgment all along the way. And a lot of the folks from VMware, when we came over, we'll just call it skeptical, right? There were a lot of hard skeptics of the pairing model of all of this stuff. Um, I
And
personally,
to be clear, that was fair. Like I am not here to throw shade on those people, but I just interrupted you. You were going to say.
well, I mean, for me, I was commuting an hour and a half from San Francisco to Palo Alto, and my commute went to walking 20 minutes. So, right, like that was a big win for me, and I would basically do whatever. And I love talking and I love processing problems, and so it turns out pairing was designed almost exactly for me. Uh, but it was that bootstrap process because it wasn't you go into retros, and when the culture has retros, you're just in it, and that and you get the thing. But there's the front side of it where you have to believe that a thing like a retro could be useful, effective, meaningful at all. And you can't tell until you run through a few problems. Do you have any comment on that cycle? I'm a new staff member. I'm introduced to this, and like, why am I in this retro? I don't even feel comfortable talking. Like, what's that
which is
person's experience?
totally fair, which is why you don't start with hey, we're going to retro. Because one of the things that can happen when you're trying to change a whole system is having such a firm mental model of what should be true and trying to install it. There is already an existing system, mental software, if you will. And you can't just overlay that because it turns out people have feelings. And so as soon as you try to overlay it, you now have the foment of, well, why are we doing this stupid thing? If you've got that much skepticism, which again, to be fair, totally reasonable to be skeptical, right?
Yep.
And so some of the first things that I did, you may not have even realized I was doing stuff. Um, so like instead of starting with retro, or I think there actually were technically retros, but they weren't actually an opportunity to reflect and adapt and have a real conversation. They were a ceremony, right?
Yep. Retro
Um,
ceremony. Okay. So you have
yep.
you act your way to new belief rather than believe your way to new action, right?
So yeah, and so if there is a place that feels kind of retro-ish where a conversation might take place, then throwing out some open-ended questions that are invitations and then see what happens. And throw out some data. I observe. You saw me say, I notice. And then I would make sure that whatever followed was not a conclusion. Whatever followed, I noticed, had to be something I saw or heard, something I observed. So a conclusion is our quality is crap. That's a conclusion. That is not data. I notice that it seems like we have more red builds than green builds. Can you help me understand what's up with that? That is an observation. Someone else looking at the system from the outside would be hard pressed to say that thing doesn't exist.
Right.
I notice we spend an awful lot of time on individual machine configuration. Is that accurate? I love how you're laughing.
Yeah, that was just so it was just so funny the multiple solutions that everyone came up with to have a consistent machine that was different from team to team and all of that sort of thing. Yeah, that's a good example of where it's even a good jumping off point because one of the things I really loved about Pivotal was if three teams are doing it, it probably needs to be thought about more. And so we that worked at the level of individual machines because eventually the organization just like came out with one machine config or a customizable machine config. But really, where that came out back to like engineering leadership, like we have three major teams, heavyweight, all solving the same problem in three different ways. So, if we jumped to that kind of much larger scale leadership thing, how did you do? I remember very specifically about these things, but how did
Oh,
you
I want to hear
identify
your
this?
memories now. You've heard me talk a lot.
Well,
What's an example of something you remember?
well, I think I think of the release int, the release eng, and
Yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
all of the other things around that. I think of the essential build systems that had to be built. The Bosch build system was totally different than everything else because you had to create an ISO, right? And so you had this one piece of the whole thing where you're creating this, VMware image essentially that no one else had to do. Um, so I just think of all of these different things that sort of led up to the same thing. So, is there anything useful to say about engineering wise what you do when you see that replicated effort?
Totally. And that actually, I have to give credit to Rob for his leadership because Rob is the one who really taught me the rule of three. And it's something that I may have thought about in loose terms before, but Rob really cemented this for me, and he has a very disciplined way of thinking about it. So creating a system, the first time someone identifies the need for a system, and then rolling it out to a whole organization is premature optimization. And it's the same as the first time I identify I'm working on code and I need to do a thing. Obviously, I should create a shareable library for thing. or whatever, right? Like that is a premature optimization. So one is not enough.
All right.
Two, okay, well, in geometric terms, we can draw a line with 2 points. So we could, but we don't know the variations that we need to account for in how we build the system. So wait for three. I mean, technically, I suppose you could wait for four, but at that point, you're now accepting way too much waste. So the rule of three. And so you pointed out, when you see three teams that need to solve the same problem, that is a really good candidate to do something. And the something might be centralize it, which is what RelEng did. Incidentally, I was actually adamantly opposed to RelEng at the beginning. I was wrong. I was right in some of the concerns that led to my conclusion of being opposed to setting up the separate organization. I was right about some things, but I was wrong, because we desperately did actually need that centralization. And that came out of the rule of three. Rob was seeing the same problems happen on every team. And he said, basically, I think we need a release engineering team. So that came from Rob.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just going to pause there because I'm not sure where I am in answering your question
No,
or what the
well, so
question
yeah,
was anymore.
we're leaping levels from, ground level, like how do you do team agreements, all the way up to like you see these really big things. And so what was so surprising to me was this just Rob, I heard him describe it as we work methodically. There's a small group of people working on something, and if we need to split that, we split that group in half, and we take the DNA on both sides. Um, but that rule of three thing was a revelation to me, because in all of my other experience, some one or some ones would get really mad about the three replicated efforts. Then you'd have warring VPs about who's winning and blah blah blah, right? And instead, what you got, I just the elephant I'm feeling around here is that there was a reasonable position to move to no matter what happened in the organization.
Totally, 100%.
That,
Incidentally, I remembered the other thing that I was going to mention, that the answer isn't always centralized. Sometimes the answer is, in fact, working agreements, but between teams, because working agreements aren't just for inside a team. And so I remember, for example, when we had first decided to use Go for all new development, and we had disagreements about how to test in Go. So we held a summit, and I facilitated that summit, but we weren't going to centralize the Go test committee. It was bringing together everyone who had enough of an opinion that they wanted to bother to be in. I believe we held this in Boulder, Colorado, but whatever. It might have been Denver, I forget. And we got everybody who cared enough to be there in a room, and we started doing show and tell, and talking through the capabilities and limitations of each of the approaches and how we wanted to do it, because it was tightly tied to dependency management and what we walked out of the room with wasn't the answer. It was a much deeper understanding of the problem space and an appreciation for each other's approaches that ultimately in time led to alignment.
alignment is my favorite thing. That, like I said, everything that happened had some aligning model. Like a biological system. Like we have to, there is a here. It needs to be thought about. And we're all the way back to the humane thing. Like people actually have to do this, and we're not going to shift to 50-hour working weeks from our 40-hour working weeks, and we're not going to give up certain sets of advantages in automation and things like that. Yeah, I just found the ability of the organization to consistently stick with that for so long. I still marvel at it. You know, so if you look at it, was that just Rob? I mean, there's essentially one judge here. And so everyone, I see it. I see that look on your face. How my vision of it from the ground level was that if you really had a significant disagreement and you ended up before Rob to adjudicate, there really was an adjudication method. He's like, well, what do you want to do? And what do and he would sort of lay out the path to any proposition in a way that the other side could see the path to your proposition, and then you had a discussion from there. Um,
Totally.
was it just that straightforward? It's like, hey, there's just one judge, and essentially you can predict well.
Well, see, that's the point at which I was making a face at you, because absolutely, there were absolutely issues that had to ultimately escalate to Rob. But that wasn't true for every single decision. So it wasn't like there's just one judge. If we had 120 people in the organization, there are 120 judges. There were some people, and on some days 240 judges, but there were some people who had authority within the system. Everyone had agency, everyone had autonomy, but there were some people who, by virtue of their title, were literally entitled and had the authority to say, all right, given this dispute and the fact that this group of people who have the dispute are unable to resolve the dispute amongst themselves, and having had the whole conversation, I'm going to make a decision for you. This is kind of a little bit of a failure mode of the organization, but not not like a big capital F fail, because it means that we had to get to the point of having an authority tell us what to do. But there are just genuinely times, you talked about dilemmas. There are genuinely times when there are good points on all sides, nobody's wrong, and yet we need one path forward. So we have to figure out that path forward. And if we can't figure it out amongst the group of people who have to execute, then we're going to figure it out with the authority figure. And there were times when I was the judge. I remember specifically one case that I'm not going to describe the details, but I remember essentially marching into someone's office and saying, no, you can't do the thing that you just attempted to do. You know, basically I was definitely not being nice in that moment. You could argue I was not being kind either, but there was a situation where there was a dispute and somebody tried to do the, I have a stronger force of will, therefore I'm going to force you, with no titular authority, no actual legitimate power in the organization to do the thing, but just strong arm a person in a way that I found personally offensive. It was against our values. And in that case, I was the judge. I was the highest ranking person, and it didn't ever have to go above me. I handled it.
Yep. I heard a great line. A friend of mine was at Charles Schwab, which has a very strong values statement. And they go so far as to say, when someone tries to force or anything like that, because it's frequently a senior executive or something like that. But the Schwab values training literally says no one is in charge when it comes to our values. They are adjudicated by the person adjudicating, which I found, given my experience with Schwab, I didn't find that fully enforced, but just that someone would say it out loud, because that's actually what I felt at Pivotal. That was a description of what I felt at Pivotal. No one's in charge of telling you how you interpret the values. You have to make a cogent case. You can't be off the reservation. You need to do the anded set, all of that. But there was none of this thing that I associate with command and control management, of essentially amygdala hijacking you into agreement. Right?
I love
That's
that
my
phrase
entire.
of yours.
Yeah, it's the entire summer. I call it paleo management, just because it's paleo management says I am willing to use the grunt in the club to get what I want. And yeah, just okay. Well, we're running to 50 minutes so far, and what I want to do in the end is give you an opportunity to, I don't know, kind of address the XP world here. What are you up to? What do you want to say to the XP world, and how do we start stitching it all together?
Oh, that's a great and huge question. But I'm
Big.
going to tell you what I was doing this morning. And probably at a different time, I will offer to show you what I was doing. I have been working on a little hobby project that is simulation of a software development system that can model. I put out one video already. I am working right now on the second video, and it allows me to model workflowing through a system and look at the impact of certain decisions on how that work flows. And the one that I'm working on right now that isn't quite ready for release is a model that connects the amount of time that a given project takes, the amount of pressure developers are under, and therefore shortcuts that they take, and the starting state of the system. Like, is it really low quality? Is it really high quality? And when do we address bug reports? And so this gives you a sense of the kinds of things that this little simulation engine can do. And I've added some nice visualizations to it. So that's what I'm working on these days. And it really is to explore some of these honestly really hard conversations. It does not explore the people side of it, but it does, I hope, provide a way to have a discussion that is more human centered about some of the hard decisions that we have to make as we are going, doing work, basically.
Yeah. Does it allow you to sort of give a thrash component or a like discoordination coefficient, anything like that?
Well, not yet. That's a really interesting idea. What's kind of fun is that thrash comes out as a second order effect. So, like, you can actually see the turbulence in the system and seeing, given these conditions, high pressure on the developers, and even with a high quality code base, high pressure, and oh, we're going to get to feature complete and we'll do the bugs after we've done the development. You can see that the lines never converge. The bug reports just keep coming, which leads to those jokes about software isn't released, it escapes. Um,
Right.
but it really is the policies that leadership puts in place about how people are treated in the system that affects the outcome. And you can see the thrash.
Yeah, yeah. This is the number one after all of the slog through the Global 2000. There's just some really narrow things like how much are you thrashing due to process? That's totally predictable. Like you can put it in a machine. Like, oh
You
yeah,
can
if you
put
do
it in a
this and you do
machine.
these, yeah, if you do this in a discoordinated way where you're not syncing and you have long cycles here and short cycles here, you end up with standing waves of nothing. That's like your path to production is horrific. Yeah, I love it. We should just do a whole show on it where you demonstrate it, and we could maybe there's like a set of standard cases, like when QA won't talk to development, when support won't talk to the product manager team, right? Like there are all of these really funny, totally obvious, totally like if you step outside of, oh yeah, that couldn't ever work, but that is standard production across the global 2000s. Totally crazy. Um, and so you're consulting under Curious Duck now, and you're
I
releasing this
am.
hobby project under Curious Duck. And we
Yep.
can find you at what's your URL?
URL is curiousduck.io.
.io, where we started at
.io.
Pivotal. Yeah, yeah,
Curiousduck.io. Yes.
fantastic. And are you doing any projects right now with anyone?
Um, I can't actually talk about my
Can't
clients.
talk about it. All right, super secret projects. All right. Well, you know that this is an attempt by me to sort of reboot the XP culture, and I'm focusing on the US because I don't have the time zone stamina for around the world. But for any pivots who are around the world, let's do this as an open source insurgency, and we'll help you bootstrap. Uh, so when you last thought, when you look across what uh, XP essentially does for development, how do we empower the XP folks and how do we, I don't know, give them a shield against the command and control management? Because I find command and control is just directly oppositional to the XP and lean model.
It is, and you can work to influence it. You can also, if you're in a position to do so, you can be a heat shield and create time and space for your team to operate in a more humane way. One of the great things is that teams that are high functioning with the XP practices, and here are, the practices of pairing, test driven development, fast feed getting to fast feedback cycles, et cetera, all of the technical practices associated with XP. When you create time and space to do those, the technical side actually does get better. And so if someone can be that sort of political heat shield, then you can create space where things will get better underneath. And then eventually you don't have to be the heat shield because things are better. And the command and control people stop yelling. They still don't understand why it's better and may make really ill-advised decisions that result in needing to constantly maintain. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but find whatever way you can to create time and space. Or as Martin Fowler said, if you can't change your organization, change your organization.
Yeah. All right. Maybe the next discussion we have is how to be a good heat shield. All right.
All right.
Elisabeth Hendrickson, Thank you for being an inaugural guest and a key part of the XP environment for a long, long time. Thank you for, thank you for what you did for my career. And, like I said, you discuss all of these things like, oh, I kind of do this thing and that thing. And it really, it seems very humble on the front side, but then they did a great thing in one of the Star Wars movies where they acknowledge C-3PO as being the architect of the revolution, like totally like in the background. And to me, you really were that because you could just go around and do this sort of gentle thing, but the wake of all of that produced working organizations. And you knew why you worked. You're like you were connected to it. And so, yeah, at Pivotal, I simply could not believe what I saw in Silicon Valley. I've been in all the salt mines, and I had never imagined anything could even be like that. And so I remain fascinated. I know you're.
Oh, thank you. It was such a joy to get to work with you. I am so grateful that we got to work together at Pivotal, and I'm grateful that it leads to a lifelong friendship. Thank you.
Yeah, we got 20 years to go, so I'll see you on the trail.
Minimum. What are you talking about?
All right, Elizabeth, we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.